Stop overfeeding your crested geckos. They don't look cute and it's making them unhealthy. What's up guys? Welcome to another video of TikisGeckos. This week I want to talk about overfeeding your crested geckos. It's probably the #1 problem I see on the internet. You know, people on Facebook, people on YouTube or anywhere, they always want to get their geckos big, fat, and cute. But in reality, this is a big issue for these guys. You don't want them to be fat where their rolls are hanging out. I'll be, the first one to say that I do have some geckos like that myself, that I have to put on a little diet or maybe shorten up the amount of food I'm giving them. But in the wild, as many of you guys saw on Dave Kaufman's video, they are very skinny. Some of you might even criticize people for keeping geckos that skinny, but in reality, that's how they should be. Obviously here in captivity, we have optimal temperature, optimal food, and we are basically in control of how much weight or how little weight they could put on. So we could put a little bit more weight than they do in the wild, but you don't want your gecko to be obese. A gecko that is obese is going to have a shorter lifespan, and if you're looking to breed your crested geckos, that's definitely going to, shorten the breeding cycle. It's going to give you worse eggs, and the quality of the eggs is going to be much lower. So the main thing you got to keep in mind when you're trying to grow these animals is that just because it grows the fastest doesn't mean it's always the healthiest. That's very important. You want to make sure the nutrition is optimal, and when you do that, you want to make sure you're feeding the proper diets, which I always recommend the Repashy or the Pangea crested gecko diets. There are some other good ones out there, but personally for my colony, I only feed the Repashy diets and the breeding formula for the Pangea. Now, also very important to feed supplements with crickets. So when you're feeding live crickets to these geckos, you want to dust them with calcium with vitamin D3. A lot of times, the calcium that I recommend is the Repashy Plus, because it's basically an all-in-one. It has all the vitamins, all the minerals, it has the D3, and it has everything in the correct percentage, I would say, so that you don't have to worry about over supplementing your crickets. You could dust them just a tiny bit to give them a light coat every single time you're going to feed, and you're not going to have to worry about getting about having too much D3 or too much calcium on your geckos. Now, when it comes to having overweight geckos, this doesn't just apply to crested geckos. This applies to gargoyle geckos, Leachianis, Chahua, and pretty much any other reptile. Bearded dragons, blue-tongued skinks. You don't want anything to be super fat, especially I know with snakes too, like the red-tailed boas. It's not healthy and it's going to reduce productivity. With reptiles, they aren't warm-blooded, so their metabolism is going to be a lot slower than it is with us. That's why reptiles can go for months sometimes without even eating. That's because their metabolism is slow, because they're cold-blooded, and if they're kind of on a brumation period, they could basically put their body to a point what the only energy they're using is to live, and they're just asleep basically. It's kind of like hibernation for a bear or something. They could totally go off food for a couple months, and this is not every reptile, of course. This depends on the reptile, but it's just to put it in perspective, right? So if you guys have reptiles, you're not gonna have to feed it 3 times a day every single day. Not at all. With crested geckos or gargoyle geckos or some of these other New Caledonian geckos, I like to feed 3 or 4 times a week. If it's a baby, then I usually say 4 or 5 times a week. A little bit more doesn't hurt because they are growing, as long as it's with the right nutrition. But when they get to an adult size that their body is not going to have to grow that much anymore, then you could slow down their eating, because that's when they can start to get fat. As they're babies or juveniles, you could really pound some food into them. Again, as long as it has the right nutrition, you could pound all this food into them and they're just gonna keep growing. But you gotta make sure that it has the right levels of calcium so their bones can keep up with the growth. Alright, so this is one of the females that I said I had to kind of put on a little diet because she was getting way too fat. Now this girl here, this is probably as you know, as fat as I would like to get them, but she's still she does very well. She eats pretty much anything I put in her bowl. And you could still see some of the rolls that she has on her sides and underneath her chin there. Some of the things that you could do to promote a healthy lifestyle for your gecko is pretty much give them the proper amount of space and the proper amount of branches and foliage so that they could climb around and do more exercise. Basically, you know, when you throw a couple crickets in there, a lot of times, especially the babies or the juveniles, will hunt them, and you know, that's always good to get them to do some exercise, I guess. A lot of the adults might stop eating crickets altogether, but if that's the case, you could always just restrict on the food you're giving them. Maybe feed them 2 to 3 times a week if they're adults. And you know, I always recommend to rotate the diets. Sometimes, you know, people will only feed what their gecko likes the most, but I think that just like people, geckos and any living thing pretty much could get a lot of benefits from eating a wide variety of foods and nutrition. So if you could, you know, give them some variety in their diet, and even if they don't eat it as much, that could definitely help with the longevity of your gecko. Okay, so this is what I would call like the perfect weight for a crested gecko. As you can see, he's more lean than he is skinny, and you could basically see his tail and his back and his sides are completely filled out. You can't see the spine or anything like that. The eyes are not sunk in, which is always a good sign. When you see the eyes that are sunk in, that's usually a problem. You could also see that this guy, you know, obviously crested geckos have big heads, but his head is pretty much a good size in relation to his body. And for the most part, I see that males, especially when you're breeding them, they tend to be a little thinner than the females, which is nothing to worry about. I'm okay with the females having a little extra fat because they are going to be producing eggs. But this is like the perfect size and the perfect look that a crested gecko should have when it comes to, you know, being healthy and longevity. Anyways, guys, for real, this is he's clearly has some rolls. She has a lot of kind of like she has a lot of chins underneath her mouth here, and she's just overall a little bit thicker than, but yeah, I'm fat shaming you, sorry. Alright guys, I hope you found this video useful. I hope you found some good information in this video. Don't freak out if you think your gecko's not eating much. These guys don't eat as much as people think they do. So remember to keep your geckos well fed but not overfed. And till next time, keep watching TikisGeckos. Thank you guys. Subscribe for more videos. If you like our content and our geckos, go check out some of our other social media pages: Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook. We have it all. And check out one of these other videos. This girl's struggling right now.